The cold Montana wind sliced through the graveyard, but Penelope Armstrong felt nothing as she knelt in the frozen earth, her trembling fingers tracing the freshly carved name on the small wooden cross. Thomas James Armstrong. Born and died 1878. Only 6 months of life, 6 months of laughter, of tiny fingers clasping her own, of midnight feedings and lullabies. 6 months that had changed everything. The tears had long since dried on her cheeks, leaving trails of salt that tightened her skin in the bitter November air. 3 days she'd been coming here, ever since they'd laid her baby boy to rest beneath the vast Montana sky. 3 days of kneeling until her skirts were soaked through and her knees ached with the cold. 3 days of wondering how to go on. "He'll never be forgotten here," a deep voice said from behind her. Penelope didn't turn. She hadn't heard anyone approach, but that didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. "He's already forgotten," she whispered, "by everyone but me." "No, madam." The voice came closer, and then a tall figure moved into her peripheral vision. "No child laid to rest in this ground is ever truly forgotten." Now she did look up, blinking against the harsh sunlight. A man stood beside her, tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn leather vest over a faded cotton shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his Stetson. Not a local man, she would have recognized him in the small community of Silver Creek. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Kieran Zachary, madam." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Just passing through on my way north." Penelope turned back to the grave. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on me, Mr. Zachary. I'm beyond comfort." "Never met a person beyond comfort, madam." He knelt beside her, not too close, respecting her space. "Though some need it more than others." "My son died in my arms." The words fell from her lips like stones. "Fever took him. Nothing I did could save him." Kieran nodded slowly. "I lost my sister to fever when I was 14. Watch my mother go through what you're feeling now." "And did she recover?" Penelope asked bitterly. "Not completely. Not ever completely." His honesty surprised her. "But she found reasons to keep living." Penelope's fingers dug into the cold earth. "I have none." "You might find them in time," he said gently. "But right now, it's enough that you're here, remembering him." A gust of wind blew across the cemetery, and Penelope shivered violently, suddenly aware of how cold she truly was. "You've been out here too long, madam," Kieran said, concern evident in his voice. "Let me help you back to town." "I can't leave him," she whispered. "You won't be leaving him. He's not only here." Kieran gestured to the grave. "He's in your memories, in your heart. That's where he lives now." Penelope looked up at him, this stranger who spoke with such gentle certainty. "How can you know that?" "Because that's where my sister lives." He offered his hand. "And I've found that remembering is easier when you're not frozen half to death." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the cold, or simply the unexpected kindness from a stranger, but Penelope found herself taking his hand. His fingers were warm and calloused as they closed around hers. "My wagon's just outside the cemetery," he said, helping her to her feet. "I can take you wherever you need to go." As they walked slowly through the rows of headstones, Penelope felt something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the first tiny acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. "I live at the edge of town," she said, "the small white house with the green shutters." Kieran nodded, leading her to a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat, then wrapped a woolen blanket around her shoulders. The warmth was shocking against her cold skin. "Thank you," she murmured. "It's nothing, madam." "Penelope," she said. "Penelope Armstrong." "Mrs. Armstrong." He nodded respectfully as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Miss," she corrected automatically. "Thomas's father. He left when I told him I was with child." Understanding flickered across Kieran's face, but no judgment. In the unforgiving terrain of the West, judgment was a luxury few could afford. Life was too hard, too unpredictable to waste energy on other people's choices. "I'm sorry," he said simply. As they drove slowly back toward Silver Creek, Penelope found herself studying the man beside her. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, not much older than her 26 years. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a jawline darkened by stubble. "You said you're passing through," she asked. He nodded. "On my way to a ranch north of here. Signed on for winter work. There's not much between here and the Canadian border. Crawford's place, about 3 days' ride from here." Penelope frowned. "The Double C. I've heard of it. They have a reputation for being difficult employers." Kieran shrugged. "Work is work. Can't be too choosy this time of year." They fell silent as they entered the town of Silver Creek. It wasn't much a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a scattering of other businesses. People stopped to stare as they passed. Penelope was used to the stares, the unwed mother, now the grieving one, but today she was too numb to care. "That's my house," she said as they approached the edge of town. The small white building stood alone against the backdrop of pine trees, smoke curling from the chimney. "My neighbor must have lit the stove." "Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold out here," Kieran observed. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of her house and jumped down, coming around to help her descend. Her legs felt stiff and unsteady after so long kneeling in the cold. "Thank you," she said again as she stood on her own porch, "for the ride and the kindness." Kieran replaced his hat. "I'll check on you tomorrow before I head north, if that's all right." Penelope wasn't sure why he would bother, but she nodded. "Yes, that would be... Thank you." He tipped his hat and turned back to his wagon. Penelope watched him go, then slowly entered her small house. The warmth inside was a physical shock after so many hours in the cold. Everything was exactly as she had left it that morning, and yet everything had changed. On the table sat a small wooden horse, whittled by her own hands as a gift for Thomas when he was older. Beside it, a blanket she'd been knitting, now never to be finished. The cradle in the corner stood empty, the tiny clothes folded neatly in the drawer. For the first time in 3 days, Penelope allowed herself to collapse onto her bed and truly weep. Morning brought a clear, cold light through her window and a knock at her door. Penelope rose stiffly, realizing she had slept in her clothes. Her eyes felt swollen and raw, her throat parched. She smoothed her hair as best she could and went to answer. Kieran Zachary stood on her porch, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Armstrong. I brought you some bread from the hotel." He offered a small package wrapped in cloth. "Thought you might not have felt up to cooking." Penelope stared at the package, then at him. "Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Zachary? You don't know me." His eyes, she noticed now, were a warm hazel color. "My ma taught me that kindness doesn't need a reason, and..." He hesitated. "I know what grief looks like. I know it helps to not face it alone, even if just for a moment." She accepted the package. "Would you like to come in for coffee? It's the least I can offer." His smile was gentle. "I'd appreciate that." Inside, Penelope busied herself with the stove, while Kieran stood awkwardly, hat in hand, taking in the modest but tidy home. His gaze lingered on the empty cradle, then quickly moved away. "You have a nice place here," he said. "It's small, but it's mine." She measured coffee into the pot. "I work as a seamstress, have a room at the back where I sew." "Skilled work," he nodded approvingly. "It pays the bills." Penelope set out 2 cups. "I was lucky to find this place when I came to Silver Creek." "Where were you before?" "Denver, but when..." She swallowed hard. "When it became clear I was expecting, I needed to leave. My parents wouldn't have me in the house." "That's hard," Kieran said quietly. "It was harder for them, I think," Penelope said with a bitter smile. "What would the neighbors say? Their unmarried daughter with child. Family should stand by family." "Perhaps, but mine didn't." She poured the coffee. "Thomas and I managed fine without them." Kieran accepted the cup she offered. "I'm sure you did. You seem like a woman who can handle whatever comes her way." "Not everything. It seems..." Her voice caught. I couldn't save him. Nobody could have, he said gently. Some things are beyond our power to change. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the strong, bitter coffee. Penelope found herself studying the man across from her. His hands were large and calloused, a working man's hands, but they moved with a certain gentleness as he held the delicate cup. "When do you leave for the Double C?" she asked. "Was planning to head out today." He set his cup down. "But I'm thinking I might delay a day or two." "Why would you do that?" His eyes met hers. "Seems like you could use a friend right now." Penelope stared at him. "Mr. Zachary, I appreciate your concern, but you don't need to delay your plans for me. I'm a stranger to you." "Not anymore," he said simply. "And besides, my horses could use the rest. Been pushing pretty hard to get here." She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need his pity or his help. But the truth was, the thought of facing another day alone with her grief was overwhelming. "If you're staying in town, at least let me pay for your room at the hotel," she said. "As thanks for your kindness." He shook his head. "I'll camp outside town, save my money." "Nonsense, it's November in Montana. You'll freeze." Penelope found herself standing, decision made. "I have a small shed out back. It's not much, but it's sheltered and dry. You can stay there if you insist on staying." Kieran looked surprised. "That's generous of you, but people might talk." Penelope gave a humorless laugh. "Mr. Zachary, people in this town have been talking about me since the day I arrived." "An unmarried woman with a baby? I'm already beyond redemption in their eyes." "Not in mine," he said quietly. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "No, I don't believe I am. And that's unusual. But the shed is yours if you want it. I can't offer much more than that." "It's more than enough." He finished his coffee and stood. "I should go check on my horses. May I stop by later?" Penelope nodded. "Yes, and perhaps you could accompany me to the cemetery. I should go back?" "I'd be honored," he said, and something in his simple acceptance made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. After he left, Penelope moved around her small house in a daze. For the first time in days, she washed her face and changed her clothes. She brushed her long dark hair and pinned it up. Not out of vanity, that emotion seemed as distant as joy, but out of habit, and a vague sense that she should maintain some semblance of normalcy. When Kieran returned in the afternoon, he had his saddlebags over his shoulder and led his horses to the small shed behind her house. Penelope watched from the window as he settled them in, speaking softly to the animals as he worked. There was something reassuring in his efficient movements, in the way he cared for his horses with gentle authority. A good man, her instincts told her. In a world where good men had proven to be scarce, she wasn't sure she trusted those instincts anymore. But for now, his presence was a lifeline she wasn't ready to reject. Later, they walked to the cemetery together in companionable silence. The day had warmed slightly, though the wind still carried a bite of winter. Penelope carried a small bunch of dried flowers she had preserved from her garden months ago. At the grave, she knelt again, but this time she felt Kieran's solid presence behind her, somehow making the pain more bearable. "I used to sing to him," she said softly. "Every night. He loved it." "What did you sing?" Kieran asked. "All the pretty little horses. It was the only lullaby I knew." Her fingers gently arranged the dried flowers at the base of the cross. He would look up at me with his big eyes, so trusting, as if he knew I would always protect him. "You did protect him," Kieran said, "every day of his life." It wasn't enough. It was everything to him. Penelope closed her eyes, fighting tears. "I keep thinking of all the things he'll never do. Never walk, never say my name, never go to school, or fall in love, or—" Her voice broke. Kieran knelt beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "My ma used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. All that love you have for Thomas, it's still there, but he's not here to receive it. That's what hurts so much." Penelope turned to him, surprised by the insight. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. His smile was tinged with sadness. Past 5 years ago. I'm sorry. He nodded in acknowledgement. In time, she found ways to redirect that love. Not to replace my sister, never that, but to honor her by loving others. I can't imagine ever loving anyone again, Penelope whispered. You don't have to imagine it now, he said gently. Now, you just remember him. Everything else comes in its own time. They stayed at the grave until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Finally, Kieran helped her to her feet. We should get back before dark, he said. As they walked back to town, Penelope found herself telling him about Thomas, his smile, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck, how he'd recently discovered his own toes and found them endlessly fascinating. Kieran listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a question that showed he was truly hearing her. By the time they reached her house, Penelope realized she'd spoken more in those few hours than in the entire week since Thomas fell ill. Would you like to stay for supper? She asked as they reached her door. I don't have much, but I can make a stew. I'd like that, he said. Let me just check on the horses first. While he tended to his animals, Penelope busied herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and preparing a simple meal. The familiar motions were comforting, giving her hands something to do while her mind continued its endless circling of grief. They ate by lamplight, talking of neutral things, the coming winter, the price of goods at the general store, Kieran's travels across the territories. He was an easy man to talk to, Penelope found. He didn't fill silences with unnecessary words, and when he did speak, he was thoughtful and direct. How did you end up as a cowhand? She asked as they finished their meal. Kieran pushed his empty bowl aside. Fell into it, I suppose. My pa was a farmer in Nebraska, small place, barely keeping us fed. When he died, there wasn't enough to keep the farm going. I was 16, strong enough to work cattle. Signed on with a rancher heading west and never looked back. Do you ever miss having a home? Sometimes. He looked around her small, cozy kitchen. Moments like this remind me what I'm missing. But the open country has its own kind of home feeling for me now. I understand that. Penelope gathered their bowls. When I first came here, I felt so lost. But then Thomas came, and suddenly this place was home. Now, she swallowed hard. Now I'm not sure what it is. It's still home, Kieran said, just a different kind than before. After they had washed the dishes together, Kieran bid her good night and retreated to the shed. Penelope stood in her doorway, watching his tall figure disappear into the darkness. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief, a small flicker of gratitude for the unexpected kindness of a stranger. That night, she dreamed of Thomas, not as he was in his final fevered hours, but as he had been in life, laughing, reaching for her with his chubby hands. She woke with tears on her face, but they were different. Tears somehow. Still full of loss, but tinged with something like thankfulness for the brief time she'd had with her son. The next morning brought heavy gray clouds and the promise of snow. Kieran was already up when Penelope emerged from her house, chopping wood beside the shed. You don't need to do that, she called, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. He looked up, axe paused mid-swing. Morning, Miss Armstrong. Just earning my keep. You've already done more than enough, she approached, noticing the sizable pile of wood he had already split. But thank you. It will be good to have extra with snow coming. Happy to help? He brought the axe down with practiced ease, splitting another log cleanly. How did you sleep? Better than I have in days, she admitted. I dreamed of Thomas. Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good dreams are a gift. Yes, they are, she hesitated. I need to go to the general store today. Would you like to join me? He set the axe down. I'd be glad to. As they walked into town together, Penelope was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Silver Creek was too small for a woman like her, unmarried with a child, and now walking with a strange man to go unnoticed. Don't mind them, Kieran said quietly. Small towns run on gossip. I'm used to it, Penelope replied, though she straightened her shoulders a little more. It was worse when I first arrived. A woman alone, obviously expecting. I think they were placing bets on how long I would last. And you proved them wrong. I had to. For Thomas. At the general store, Mrs. Holloway greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. Miss Armstrong, good to see you out and about. We've all been so worried. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Penelope said stiffly. I need flour, coffee, and some sugar, please. While the shopkeeper gathered her items, Kieran wandered around the store, examining tools and supplies with the careful eye of a man who knew the value of good equipment. And who might your friend be? Mrs. Holloway asked, not even attempting subtlety. Mr. Zachary is passing through on his way north, Penelope said. He's been kind enough to help me during this difficult time. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. Well, that's neighborly of him. We were all so sorry about your boy, Miss Armstrong. Such a sweet baby. For once, Penelope heard genuine sympathy in the woman's voice. Thank you, she said, her throat tight. I put a jar of my preserves in with your things, Mrs. Holloway added. No charge. You need to keep up your strength. Surprised by the unexpected kindness, Penelope could only nod her thanks. As they left the store, packages in hand, Kieran glanced down at her. See? Not everyone's judging. No, Penelope admitted. Not everyone. They were halfway back to her house when the first snowflakes began to fall large, lazy flakes that drifted down from the heavy sky. Winter's coming early this year, Kieran observed, looking up at the clouds. It always comes too soon in Montana, Penelope replied, and stays too long. By the time they reached her house, the snow was falling steadily, already beginning to accumulate on the ground. Kieran helped her store the supplies, then build up the fire in her stove until the small house was warm and cozy. This will make traveling difficult, Penelope said, watching the snow through the window. I've ridden in worse, Kieran replied, though he frowned as he looked outside. But it might be wise to wait a day or two, see if it passes. Stay as long as you need, she found herself saying. The shed isn't much, but it's sheltered. He turned to her, his expression serious. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, Penelope said. I appreciate the company. Something shifted in his eyes, then a warmth, an understanding. Then I'll stay until the weather clears. The snow continued through the day and into the night, transforming Silver Creek into a hushed white landscape. Penelope and Kieran passed the hours in comfortable companionship, he mending his tack at her kitchen table while she worked on a dress commission for the hotel owner's wife. As darkness fell, Kieran reluctantly prepared to head out to the shed for the night. It's freezing out there, Penelope said, looking worriedly at the heavy snow. The shed isn't insulated. I've slept in worse conditions, he assured her. I'll be fine with my bedroll and the horses for warmth. At least take an extra blanket. She fetched one from her trunk. And there's a lantern you can use. He accepted both with a grateful nod. Thank you, Miss Armstrong. Penelope, she said suddenly. Please call me Penelope. Miss Armstrong makes me feel like a school teacher. His smile was warm. Penelope, then, and I'm Kieran. Good night, Kieran, she said softly. Good night, Penelope. Sleep well. She watched from the window as he made his way through the snow to the shed, the lantern light bobbing in the darkness. Long after he disappeared inside, she stood there, feeling a strange mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. The snow continued through the night and all the next day, piling up in drifts against the houses and turning the main street into an impassable white expanse. Kieran spent the morning clearing a path from Penelope's door to the shed and chopping more firewood to keep her stove burning hot. By afternoon, cabin fever had set in, and Penelope found herself restless in the confines of her small house. When Kieran came in, stomping snow from his boots, she made a spontaneous decision. Let's go to the cemetery, she said. He looked at her in surprise. In this weather? It's a half-mile through deep snow. I know, but She twisted her hands together. I feel I should check on him. It's silly, I know he's not really there, but... It's not silly, Kieran said gently, but it will be hard going. I'm stronger than I look, Penelope said, already reaching for her heaviest coat and a pair of men's boots she'd purchased for practical work around her property. Kieran studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we'll need to be quick before the light fails. The journey to the cemetery was arduous, just as he'd warned. The snow came up past their knees in places, and the bitter wind cut through even the warmest clothing. But Penelope pushed on with determination, following in Kieran's footsteps as he broke trail ahead of her. When they finally reached the cemetery gates, Penelope was breathing hard, her face numb from the cold. The graveyard was transformed by snow, each headstone wearing a white cap, the ground a smooth, unbroken expanse. I don't even know if we'll find it, she said, suddenly realizing the difficulty of locating a small grave in these conditions. We will, Kieran said confidently. I remember where it is. He led her through the snow, counting rows and measuring distances with his eyes, until finally he stopped. Here, this is Thomas's resting place. Penelope knelt in the snow, brushing it away from the small wooden cross. The name was barely visible, but it was there, her son's final marker in this world. I was worried the snow would bury it completely, she said, that no one would know he was here. Kieran knelt beside her. He'll never be forgotten here, he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. I promise you that. Penelope looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life just when she needed someone most. Why do you care so much about a woman and child you never knew before 3 days ago? His eyes, serious in his weathered face, held hers. Because everyone deserves to be remembered, and because no one should face such grief alone. Something broke loose inside Penelope, then not the raw, jagged grief of the past days, but something deeper and older. The weight of all the times she had been alone, all the burdens she had carried by herself, all the moments when having someone by her side would have made the difference between despair and hope. Thank you, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. They stayed only a few minutes longer. The cold was too bitter for extended mourning. As they made their way back to town, the snow began to fall again, heavy and wet, filling in their tracks almost as soon as they made them. We need to hurry, Kieran said, taking her hand to help her through a particularly deep drift. Weather's turning worse. By the time they reached Penelope's house, they were both soaked through and chilled to the bone. Kieran quickly built up the fire while Penelope changed into dry clothing in her bedroom. When she emerged, he was still in his wet clothes, stoking the flames. You need to get dry too, she said. You'll catch your death. He glanced down at himself ruefully. My spare clothes are in the shed and I don't fancy going back out in this. Penelope hesitated only a moment before going to a trunk in the corner. I have some things that might fit you, she said, pulling out a pair of trousers and a flannel shirt. They belong to Thomas's father. Kieran looked at her in surprise. Are you sure? They're just sitting here, she said. Better used than wasted. He accepted the clothes with a grateful nod and retreated to change, while Penelope busied herself making hot coffee. When he returned, the clothes fit him reasonably well, though the trousers were a bit short at the ankles. Better? She asked, handing him a steaming cup. Much. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Thank you. They sat before the fire, warming themselves and watching the snow through the window. The wind had picked up, driving the flakes horizontally past the glass. Looks like a proper blizzard now, Kieran observed. You won't be traveling for a few days at least, Penelope said. Not until this passes and the trails clear somewhat. He looked at her. I don't want to impose on your hospitality longer than necessary. It's no imposition, she said softly. Truth be told, I'm grateful for the company. Kieran's expression softened. Then I'm glad to be here. They fell into a comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and listening to the howl of the wind outside. Penelope found herself studying Kieran's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his temple, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "What will you do?" he asked suddenly. "After winter?" She looked down at her cup. "I don't know. Continue with my sewing, I suppose. Take each day as it comes. Have you thought about leaving Silver Creek, starting fresh somewhere else?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but now Thomas is here. I can't leave him." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He'll always be with you wherever you go, but I understand wanting to stay close." "What about you?" Penelope asked. "Will you always be a drifting cowhand?" He smiled wryly. "Not always, I hope. Been saving to buy a small spread of my own someday. Somewhere in Montana, maybe. I like the mountains." "That's a good dream," she said softly. "Just a dream so far," he replied, "but I'm getting closer every year." As the evening wore on, the storm intensified, rattling the windows and sending drafts of cold air through every crack in the walls. Penelope built up the fire as much as she dared, but still the small house grew chilled. "You can't go back to the shed tonight," she said as darkness fell completely. "It's not safe in this weather." Kieran looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to compromise your reputation any more than I already have." Penelope gave a bitter laugh. "My reputation? Mr. Zachary Kieran. I'm an unmarried woman who had a child out of wedlock. My reputation was compromised long before you arrived." "Still," he said, "I respect you too much to—" "You can sleep here by the fire," she interrupted. "I'll take my bed. There's nothing improper in sharing shelter during a blizzard." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Penelope fetched blankets and a pillow, helping him make a pallet on the floor near the stove where it would be warmest. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved with careful precision in her small home, the clean scent of him despite days on the trail. The gentle strength in his hands as he took the blankets from her. "Will you be warm enough?" she asked, suddenly feeling awkward. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "This is luxury compared to sleeping on the open range." She nodded, retreating to her own bedroom. "Good night, then." "Good night, Penelope." She closed her door, leaning against it for a moment, her heart beating strangely fast. What was happening to her? Just days ago, she'd been certain she would never feel anything again except grief. Now there was something else, something unexpected and slightly frightening in its newness. Pushing the thoughts away, she prepared for bed, listening to the soft sounds of Kieran settling on his makeshift bed in the other room. The storm raged outside, but inside her small house, there was a sense of security she hadn't felt since Thomas died. In the middle of the night, Penelope woke to the sound of movement. For a moment she was disoriented, her mind automatically listening for Thomas's cries. Then reality crashed back, along with the grief that never truly left. A soft glow came from beneath her door. The stove was still lit. She heard Kieran moving about quietly, probably adding wood to keep the fire going. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she opened her door. He was kneeling before the stove, arranging logs carefully to maximize the heat. He looked up at her appearance, his face golden in the firelight. "I'm sorry if I woke you," he said. "Just keeping the fire going." "It's all right." She moved closer, drawn to the warmth. "I don't sleep well anyway, since—" "I understand." He closed the stove door and stood. "Would you like some water? I heated some." She nodded, and he poured her a cup from the kettle. Their fingers brushed as he handed it to her, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Thank you," she murmured, sitting in the chair nearest the fire. Kieran remained standing, uncertain. "Would you rather be alone? I can go back to sleep." "No," she said quickly, then more softly. "No, I'd welcome the company." He sat in the chair opposite hers, the stove between them. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows in their frames. "Some storm," he commented. "Montana winters are fierce," Penelope replied. "I wasn't prepared my first year here. Nearly froze before I learned how to properly insulate the house." "You've done well," Kieran said, glancing around the cozy room. It's a good home. It is, she agreed. Or it was. It can be again, he said gently. In time. Penelope stared into the small flames visible through the grate in the stove door. I keep thinking I hear him crying in the night. I wake up reaching for him, and then I remember. My mother said the same thing after my sister died, Kieran said, that the echoes stay with you. Does it ever get easier? He considered this seriously. Not easier exactly, but different. The grief changes shape, becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. Penelope looked at him, really looked at him, this man who spoke of grief with such intimate knowledge, who had appeared in her life at her lowest moment. You've known a lot of loss, she observed. He nodded. More than some, less than others. That's life in the territories. And yet you're still kind, she said softly, still willing to help a stranger. Kindness is free to give, he replied, and sometimes it's the only thing that matters. They talked through the night as the storm raged outside, sharing stories of their lives, of joys and sorrows, of dreams deferred and hopes still burning. Penelope told him about growing up in Denver, the daughter of a successful merchant who had expected her to make a good marriage, about meeting James, Thomas's father, and believing his promises of love and future happiness, about discovering her pregnancy and his subsequent abandonment. Kieran spoke of his childhood on the Nebraska farm, of his father's early death and his mother's struggle to keep the family together, of his wandering years as a cowhand, moving from ranch to ranch across the West, of the people he'd met and the places he'd seen, and the dream that kept him going, a small piece of land to call his own. As dawn approached, the storm began to ease, the wind dropping to an occasional gust rather than a constant howl. You should get some sleep, Kieran said, noticing Penelope trying to hide a yawn. So should you, she replied. I'm used to long nights on watch. He smiled. Go rest. I'll make sure the fire stays lit. Reluctantly, she returned to her bed, but sleep eluded her. Something had shifted during those night hours of conversation, something fundamental and irreversible. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had thought about the future, had imagined possibilities beyond mere survival, and it frightened her. The storm lasted 3 more days, keeping Kieran at Penelope's house and effectively cutting off Silver Creek from the outside world. During that time, they fell into a comfortable routine. He tended the fire and cared for his horses in the shed. She cooked and worked on her sewing commissions. In the evenings, they talked, sharing more of themselves with each passing day. On the 4th morning, Penelope woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through her window. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world transformed by snow, but bathed in clear, cold light. She found Kieran outside, shoveling a path from her door to the road. He looked up at her appearance, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Morning, he called. Beautiful day. Yes, she agreed, looking at the pristine white landscape, though it will make traveling difficult. He paused, leaning on his shovel. The trails will be passable in a day or two, once the sun has a chance to work on them a bit. Penelope felt a pang at the thought of his departure. Yes, I suppose they will. They spent the day clearing snow and checking on neighbors. Silver Creek was beginning to dig out from the storm, people emerging from their homes to assess the damage and help each other recover. To Penelope's surprise, several people who had previously been cool toward her now greeted her warmly, asking after her welfare with genuine concern. Word travels, Kieran said when she mentioned it. Everyone knows about Thomas now, and grief is something folks out here understand all too well. That evening, they walked to the cemetery together. The snow had drifted high in places, but others had been through before them, breaking trail. When they reached Thomas's grave, Penelope was touched to see that someone had placed a small wreath of evergreen boughs on the cross. Who would do this? She wondered aloud. Someone who cares, Kieran said. See, you're not as alone here as you thought. As they stood by the grave in the fading light, Penelope found herself speaking words she hadn't planned. "I think I need to let him go," she said softly. "Not forget him, never that. But let go of the future I imagined for him, for us." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's the hardest part, surrendering the might-have-beens." "But I have to," she continued. "Otherwise, I'll be trapped forever in that future that never came to pass." He hesitated, then gently took her gloved hand in his. "You're one of the strongest women I've ever met, Penelope Armstrong. You'll find your way forward." She looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice. "Thank you for being here, Kieran. I don't know what I would have done these past days without you." His eyes, warm even in the cold twilight, held hers. "I'm glad I could help." That night, their last before the trails would likely be clear enough for Kieran to continue his journey, they sat before the fire as had become their custom. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the flames and the occasional pop of sap in the wood. "I've been thinking," Kieran said finally, "about Crawford's ranch." "What about it?" Penelope asked. "I'm not sure it's where I should be going." He poked at the fire with a stick, not meeting her eyes. "There are other ranches, other opportunities." Penelope's heart beat a little faster. "You're considering staying in the area?" "Maybe." Now he did look at her. "If there were reason enough." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. "Kieran," she said softly, "I don't want you to change your plans out of pity for me." "Pity?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is," she admitted. "I only know that a week ago I was certain I would never feel anything again except grief. And now—" "And now?" he prompted when she fell silent. "Now I find myself thinking of tomorrow. And the day after that." She twisted her hands in her lap. "And wondering if you might be part of them." Kieran set aside the fire poker and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Penelope, from the moment I saw you in that cemetery, I felt drawn to you. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. I saw someone who understood loss as I do, but who faced it with courage and dignity. I wasn't brave," she whispered. "I was devastated." "You can be both," he said gently. "And you were." "Are." She looked down at their joined hands. "What are you saying, Kieran?" "I'm saying that if you want me to stay, I will. Not just for a day or a week, but for as long as you'll have me." His eyes held hers, earnest and clear. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but sometimes life gives you a chance at happiness when you least expect it, and I've learned not to question those gifts." Penelope felt tears welling in her eyes, not the bitter tears of grief, but something different, something that tasted almost like hope. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "afraid to trust again, to care again, afraid of losing someone else I love." "I know," he squeezed her hands. "I'm asking you to be brave again, to take a chance on me, on us. But I won't rush you. If you need time, I'll wait." She studied his face, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and understanding from the moment they met. Could she trust again? Dare to build a new future from the ashes of her old one? "Stay," she whispered. "Please stay." Kieran's smile lit his entire face, slowly giving her time to pull away if she wished. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss, full of promise and tenderness. Penelope closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel something other than pain for the first time in too long. When they parted, she touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with wondering fingers. "This isn't what I expected when I went to the cemetery that day." "Life rarely gives us what we expect," he said softly. "Sometimes it gives us what we need instead." The following morning, Kieran rode into town to send a telegram to the Double C Ranch, explaining that he would not be taking the position after all. When he returned, he found Penelope sitting at her table, a piece of paper before her. "What's that?" he asked, stamping snow from his boots. She looked up, a mixture of nervousness and determination on her face. "A list of things we need to discuss if you're really staying," he smiled, taking off his coat and hat. "Practical as always." "Someone has to be," she said, but returned his smile. "We hardly know each other, Kieran." "There's so much to figure out." "We have time," he said, sitting across from her. "All the time we need." Over the next few days, they talked through the practicalities where Kieran would live, in town for now, to protect Penelope's reputation, how he would support himself. The local rancher, Mr. Sullivan, was happy to hire an experienced hand for the winter, and what their future might look like together, taking it one day at a time with no promises beyond honesty and respect. A week after Kieran's decision to stay, Penelope accompanied him to Thomas's grave again. She placed a small carved wooden horse, the one she had made for her son, at the base of the cross. "I want him to know I'm not abandoning him," she said quietly, "that I'll always be his mother, always remember him." "He knows," Kieran said, his arm around her shoulders, "and he would want you to be happy, Penelope. Children always want that for their parents." She looked up at him, this man who had walked into her life at her darkest moment and somehow brought light back into it. "I think I might be someday. Happy again." "One day at a time," he reminded her gently. "One day at a time," she agreed. As winter settled fully over Silver Creek, Penelope and Kieran's relationship grew slowly, carefully, built on shared grief and mutual respect. He called on her properly, taking her for sleigh rides and escorting her to church services. The town watched with interest, but to Penelope's surprise, with more approval than censure. "You're good for each other," Mrs. Holloway said one day when Penelope was in the general store. "Anyone can see that." By spring, when the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared in Penelope's small garden, Kieran had earned enough working for Mr. Sullivan to put a down payment on a small piece of land just outside town, 10 acres with a modest cabin and a view of the mountains. "It needs work," he told Penelope as they stood on the porch of what might someday be their home. "But the bones are good, like us." She smiled at the comparison. "Yes, like us." On a warm day in June, 1 year after Thomas's birth, Penelope and Kieran were married in the small church in Silver Creek. She wore a simple dress of pale blue that she had sewn herself and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadows outside town. After the ceremony, they visited Thomas's grave together. Penelope had replaced the wooden cross with a proper headstone, small but sturdy, with his name and dates carefully carved. "I want you to know," she said to Kieran as they stood hand in hand beside the grave, "that I will always carry him with me. He will always be part of who I am." "As he should be," Kieran said. "He brought me to you in a way. I'll always be grateful to him for that." Penelope leaned against her husband's solid strength, feeling the warm summer breeze on her face. "Do you think we'll have children of our own someday?" "I hope so," Kieran said, his voice gentle. "If that's what you want." "I do," she said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Not to replace Thomas, never that, but to expand our family, to create new joy." "Then that's what we'll do," he promised, "together." As they walked back to town, to the celebration waiting for them at the hotel, Penelope looked up at the vast Montana sky, so blue and endless it made her heart ache. Life had taken so much from her, but had given back in ways she could never have imagined. "You'll never be forgotten here," Kieran had said that first day. And he had been right. Thomas would always be remembered, always be loved. But now there was room in her heart for new love, new beginnings, new hope. One step at a time, one day at a time, Penelope and Kieran Zachary would build their life together, a life founded on shared grief, but sustained by shared joy, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its endless capacity for renewal. In the years that followed, their small homestead flourished. Kieran's careful management and hard work transformed the 10 acres into a productive farm, with horses, cattle, and fields of grain. Penelope continued her sewing business, gaining a reputation throughout the region for her fine work. And every Sunday, without fail, they visited Thomas's grave together, keeping his memory alive in their hearts. 2 years after their wedding, Penelope gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Sarah. She was followed 2 years later by a son, William. Both children grew up knowing about their older brother, the little boy whose short life had brought their parents together. On his birthday each year, the whole family would visit his grave, bringing flowers and telling stories, ensuring that Thomas James Armstrong was never forgotten. As Penelope watched her children play in the yard of their home one summer evening, Kieran came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. She leaned against him, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor through joy and sorrow alike. "Yes," she said simply, "more than I ever thought possible again." And it was true. The grief remained, a quiet presence in her heart, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it had become part of the tapestry of her life, a dark thread that, woven among the brighter colors of love and joy and hope, created a picture of extraordinary beauty and resilience.